This is a Pulp archive recording. All public Pulp archive recordings are licensed under Creative Commons. For more information or to support us, please visit patreon.com/pulparchive. This episode was prepared by Saul and narrated by Tucker, the digital narrator. Six Gun Rights by Philip F. Deere. Wild West, Weekly, September, 1929. This episode contains period-typical depictions of crime, violence, and mild profanity. Listener discretion is advised. Bobby Kendall, decked out in his best outfit, bleached beaver Stetson, yellow silk shirt, and white goatskin chaps, nicked gently the flanks of Bonita, his wiry sorrel mare, with his silver spurs. The horse, surprised from its drowsy pace by this unusual treatment, broke into a lope that carried them toward the one dusty street that was the pride of the cowtown of San Pablo. For, as they passed a false front ramshackle building beyond the edge of town down near the creek, 2 6-gun shots had sounded from its interior. In the early days of San Pablo, the structure had been a livery barn and stage station, but the town had long since moved away from it into the shelter of a clump of oak, several hundred yards to the west, leaving it decaying, windowless, and sun-beaten. Doggone queer, Bobby thought as he hastened from the scene. Ain't been anybody in that building for years, far as I can recollect. But curiosity did not overcome discretion, and Bobby continued on his way. For Bobby Kendall had always given trouble as wide a berth as possible in a land where men carried revolvers as naturally as they donned the boots that safeguarded them from the rocks and creeping things of the range. Bobby went unprotected. His waist was adorned neither by cartridge belt nor holster. There was no weapon there today, nor had there ever been one. But there was nothing weak about him. He looked upon the world from frank blue eyes, set in a firm, almost solemn face. The ruddy coat of tan on his cheeks had not entirely submerged their natural pinkness. His attire reflected his love of color. Perhaps he was afraid to pack a gun. At least that was one explanation. As a whole, the range land considered it no business of theirs. But out on the Triple T, where Bobby worked, his failure to live up to the customs of the land had been taken as an affront. He flushed as he thought of it. Bobby was galloping into town now, and he saw a woman staring curiously at him from the window of the first adobe house on Main Street. He wondered if she had heard the shots, but his mind swerved immediately to matters of more personal importance. I hope the gang ain't laying for me, drat 'em, he thought. They'll try to make me plumb ridiculous. For this was payday for the Triple T, and the majority of that hard-riding, deep-drinking, and fight-loving outfit were already in town. Probably entrenched in front of the buffet. At the Sunlight Bar, awaiting the appearance of old Thomas T. Travers, owner of the ranch. It was the custom of TT to pay off his riders in town. The rancher usually rode in with the boys, repairing to the bank where he drew out the cash, and then rejoining the crew at the bar where he paid them off. As Bobby reached the tie rail, he saw a dozen familiar animals there and knew that the gang was inside. He looked the ponies over again and drew a sigh of relief. Flank Jeffers and Lou Rawson ain't here anyway, he muttered. Jeffers and Rawson, 2 hard-bitten individuals, were Bobby's particular worry. They had made life miserable for the young rider during the few months they had been with the Triple T. They disliked Bobby for his mild, calm manner, and the youth in return held him in such contempt that it irked them once when drunk. They had made the mistake of smoking up Bobby's feet with their .45S in an attempt to frighten the young man. But Bobby had outnerved and discomfited them. He had stood quietly unconcerned with the slugs biting into the dirt around his feet until their guns were empty. Then he had turned his back on them and walked calmly away. Why don't he carry a gun? Lou Rawson had snarled angrily after it was over. He's afeard he'd have to fight like a man then. Bobby sauntered quietly into the barroom. He was immediately spotted by the boisterous ones. Hey, gents, roared Oklahoma Jack. Peter's the wrangler for the outfit. Here's Little Blue Eyes. What's the matter, kid? I feared to ride to town with the men. We wouldn't hurt you. Lay off, Jack, said a stern voice. It was Big Jim Saunders, the foreman. Let Bobby alone just because them two buzzards Jeffers and Rawson starts riding the boy. Don't you old-timers try it? Bobby has been with us too long for that. A half-dozen hands clapped Bobby on the back in a token of friendship, and he swallowed hard. But he realized that they regarded him as only a boy, though he was nearly 23 now. That was the penalty of being meek. Though he was a full-fledged rider now, these men could see in him only the gangling stable boy and cook's helper that he had been when he started with the Triple T. Why, he could outride and outrope any man there, and they knew it. But he could not outshoot them, and therein lay the difference. Bobby drank a round and then sat quietly in a corner, awaiting the appearance of the boss with the payroll. The rest of the riders, their credit always good on the first of the month, drank steadily. Then the doors swung open with a bang, and in strode Jeffers and Rawson. They had evidently been making the rounds of the other saloons in town, for they were flushed, and their eyes bloodshot. They sighted Bobby and swooped loudly down on him, dragging him, protesting to the bar. "The next drink is on the kid," said Jeffers, grinning as he passed the bottle down the bar. "How about it, Kendall?" "Sure," Bobby responded, reaching into his pocket for his slender money bag. As he pulled out the leather pouch, two yellow objects fell from his pocket and rang on the floor. He had pulled them out with a sack. Rawson quickly stooped and picked them up. "Look here, fellows," he said loudly. $10 gold pieces, and we ain't been paid yet. Bobby's rich, he's collecting gold now." Bobby stared in amazement. "They ain't mine," he said, stammering in surprise. "Gold was a rare article down here in the Southwest." "Yes, they're not gold." Just then a panting cowhand burst into the place, sweating and excited. "Boys, some sneak has just killed Old T and skipped with the payroll," he shouted. "A kid just found the body down in the old stable near the creek. 5,000 cartwheels gone, and in gold, too. The old man drew out some extra money to send down into Mexico for more cattle." Gold silence fell suddenly over the room, and Bobby felt himself growing cold as he stared at the two incriminating gold pieces in his hand. Every eye was turned on the two yellow coins, and there was an air of suspicion that soon grew into one of menace. "Where did you get 'em?" asked Big Jim quietly. "I never seen 'em before," Bobby said, his face pale, for he fully realized his predicament. "Rats," sneered Jeffers. "I always thought they was something besides empty air in this kid's head." "Wearing no gun, it was only a stall, I bet. Yet he was shot in the back, plugged by some skunk. It was somebody what knew him and his habits. 2 bullets through the back." "Correct," snapped a big man who had just entered. He wore the star of a sheriff. "He was lured there and—" "Let's string him up," yelled Rawson, his face malevolent. "Not so rapid," said the sheriff grimly, his hand hovering near his gun. "This boy ain't been proved guilty yet. I've known Bobby since he was a boy. Let the law take its course, and as Sheriff Brick Barrows was a gunman of wide reputation, Rawson and Jeffers became sullenly silent under the steady gaze of his old gray eyes. "I'll take you down to the calaboose, young feller," said Brick kindly. "Where did you get them yaller pieces?" "I don't know," Bobby said desperately. "Someone must have planted 'em on me." Rawson and Jeffers guffawed loudly in derision. That afternoon, a woman who lived in the Doble house identified Bobby as having fled from the scene shortly after the sound of the shooting. For a climax, Rawson and Jeffers testified at a hurriedly held inquest that Bobby had refused to ride to town with the rest of the riders, preferring to come in later alone. As a result, Bobby's life hung by the slenderest of threads at dusk. A mob formed and swept down on the jail with Jeffers and Rawson inciting and leading them. But Brick Barrows was awaiting them, barricaded behind the jail doors with a stack of loaded 6 guns and repeating Winchesters at his side, and Rawson and Jeffers did not have the nerve to lead a rush. Without leaders, the mob hesitated and milled about the front of the jail, making threats. While the palaver was going on out in front, Bobby sat tensely in his cell, listening. He could hear Brick's voice occasionally boom forth a warning. He heard men demanding his life. Then there came a movement at the window of his cell. It overlooked a dark alley at the rear of the jail. A peaked hat appeared. "It's me, Bobby," whispered the voice of Big Jim Saunders. I am going to get you out of this before them fools try to rush Brick. He might not be able to hold him." Big Jim passed a rope to Bobby with instructions to pass a hitch around a bar. His head disappeared while Bobby secured the loop. He heard the pad of a horse's hoofs. The rope snapped taut and the bar was jerked from its bedding in the dobe wall. Another bar was pulled loose in the same manner. Then Bobby climbed through and dropped into the alley. "Here's your horse," said Big Jim. "Better hightail it for the border." "Nix," said Bobby, and there was nothing boyish about him now. "I am going to hide out in the creek bottom. I didn't kill the old man. Why, he was like a father to me." "I know you didn't," said Big Jim, "and Brick knows it too. You'll be safe there. I'll tip off Brick. Stay away from that particular locality. He'll have pretend to hunt for you. That'll give him a chance to check up on a few other hombres that is under suspicion. I am taking a hand in this here man hunt," said Bobby grimly as he swung into the saddle. "I got a hunch I know who murdered the boss." "Who?" asked Jim. "Wouldn't like to say now," said Bobby as he extended his hand. "I won't forget this, Jim. I sure needed a friend tonight. Will you do one thing more for me?" Jim nodded. "Get me a 6-gun and about 2,000 rounds of shells. Here's all the money I got. I'll have 2, owe you the balance. Leave them in the big dead black oak that stands near the arroyo a mile south of town. I am going to make my headquarters there 'cause the brush is mighty thick. It's a good place to hide out, Bobby," said Big Jim. "I grew up today. There is some snakes in this country what needs killing, and I am going to do it." "What day I want with a gun, Bobby?" exclaimed Jim. "I'm going to learn to use one," said Bobby. Big Jim stared at Bobby in amazement. The boy's eyes were no longer dreamy. They were hard and steely. His face had lost its roundness in the space of a few hours. Bobby Kendall was a boy no longer. Jim hardened veteran of the range that he was had seen killers before. He recognized a potential one before him. "Now 3. I'll have the gun and stuffins there tomorrow," he promised. "But don't do nothing rash, Bobby. Don't tackle anything you can't handle. There are plenty of fast guns hereabouts, and you ain't had no experience with shooting irons." "Don't fret about me," said Bobby as he pushed away into the darkness. He rode from San Pablo unseen. Most of the town's citizenry were grouped at the front of the jail. He headed for the creek, following the road until he reached the ford. Instead of crossing, he urged the sure-footed Bonita upstream over the rocky bottom. It was slow going in the darkness, but after a mile or so of it, Bobby sighted the gaunt witch-like arms of the dead oak towering against the stars above the rim of the arroyo. He scouted in the darkness until he found a clear spot in the midst of a clump of manzanita and scrub oak which afforded concealment. He camped there for the night. At noon the next day, he sighted a horseman on the rim of the arroyo. He was Big Jim, and Bobby watched as the foreman placed a package in the hollow bowl of the big oak. Jim scanned the creek bottom before departing, but Bobby did not emerge from his concealment. After his friend had gone, the young fugitive, afoot, scrambled up to the oak and smiled with satisfaction as he inspected the Colt. .44 with holster and cartridge belt that Jim had left. It was not a new gun, probably one that Jim had used himself. It was well balanced and long barreled, with the sight filed off. With it were 2 heavy boxes of cartridges. Bobby surveyed the rolling rangeland for horsemen, but there were none. Jim had already disappeared on the old trail to town. Then Bobby donned the belt and gun. For the first time in his life, he was armed. The weapon swung low on his right thigh, and he secured it to his leg with the weighing leather with which it was equipped. He broke open one of the ammunition boxes and loaded the gun. As he hefted the weapon, there came to him a sense of familiarity with it. He had rarely even held a pistol in his hand during his life on the range, and never had he felt the recoil of a shot. But nevertheless, the heavy 6-gun seemed to fit into his grasp as though he had always used one if one had the power of turning time back a decade or two. The explanation of this was evident. Bobby never had known his father, Lynn Kendall. Lynn Kendall had lived by the gun and died by the gun. A deputy marshal, cattleman and peace officer in Montana during the early border days. The elder Kendall's name had spelled death to bad men. He had died with a rustler's bullet in his back when Bobby was less than a year old. He had died with his boots on, his six-gun in his hand, taking his slayer with him across the Great Divide. But Bobby's mother, from whom he had inherited his calm blue eyes and fair complexion, had drilled into the boy an abhorrence of violence and of deadly weapons. She had never exacted a promise not to fight. She merely taught Bobby to avoid trouble. She had migrated from Montana to the Southwest, where the name of Kendall meant nothing. There she had raised and educated Bobby and then passed peacefully away to join his father. And so in Bobby's veins flowed the blood of his father, and in his hands now was the type of weapon that Lynn Kendall had known so well how to use. Bobby slid the gun into the holster, then he whipped it forth as he had seen other men do. "Too slow," he muttered. He practiced the draw for an hour. He made satisfactory progress. Finally, he drew and pulled the trigger, at the same time aiming at the oak. The gun boomed, but the bullet spat into the ground 20 feet in front of him. Bobby continued practicing untiring, his face eager. This was a game for him. He forgot that he was a fugitive. He was doing something that he liked to do. The thing came naturally to him. Soon he was drawing and firing with speed that surprised him, and his shots were striking the tree regularly. Now for some sharpshooting, he thought. He selected a knot on the side of the dead oak at a height that would correspond to a man's chest. He drew and fired, but missed the tree completely. "Too anxious," he said. He dropped the gun back in the holster, walked back 2 paces and whirled, drawing the gun easily and without strain. He fired almost from the hip. It was partly luck, for Bobby, after all, was only a novice. But the shot was a dead-center hit on the knot, which was only as big as a saucer. The knot disappeared under the impact of the bullet being torn from its place in the thin shell of the hollow tree. Bobby walked up to it in satisfaction and stared through the hole in the trunk. A yellow gleam met his eye. He stared incuriously for a minute. Then with amazement, "Money?" he breathed. In a moment he had crawled bodily into the tree through the opening at the base. Once within, there was room enough for a man to stand erect. There, hanging to knots on the inside of the rotting trunk, were 2 bags of gold. Both sacks were pierced by bullets he had fired into the tree, and a few gold pieces had fallen to the ground. "The Triple T money," Bobby gasped. He emerged into the open air with his find. By a stroke of chance, he had located the loot taken from the dead body of Thomas T. Travers. But it was not so strange after all. The same impulse that had brought Bobby to the dead oak had also actuated the murderer. The tree was a landmark. It could be seen for miles, and was so familiar to the average resident of the locality that none would likely think of it as a hiding place for the money. It was off the beaten track, for the stage trail lay a mile away down the creek. But for Bobby's lucky bullet, it would have remained safe from discovery. For a while, Bobby considered. Then he crawled back into the tree and replaced the sacks in their original positions. "I'll hang around here," he decided. "Sooner or later, the fellow what drilled the old man will come moseying along and look into the tree." He paced off 50 feet and resumed gun practice, choosing, however, a slender cottonwood as his target. Now that he had a definite objective in view, he worked with deadly earnestness. He knew now that sometime in the near future his life might depend on his ability with the pistol. This mental attitude had a vastly beneficial result. He sent slug after slug into the heart of the cottonwood. He rarely missed. Now, when his speed on the draw improved steadily, Bobby finally knocked off for the day. He had fired nearly 300 rounds, but he was satisfied. The barrel of the gun was hot, and the place smelled of powder smoke. His arm was tired from the constant drag of the heavy Colt. It was unaccustomed work for him. "Hope nobody heard the bombardment," he speculated as he made his way down the side of the arroyo, and was enfolded by the brush in the river bottom. But there was small chance of that. The town was more than a mile away and separated from the spot by a sage-dotted ridge. The creek wound through rolling ground and sound, would not carry far along it. In addition, the wind was in the right direction. He exercised his newly won skill on a cottontail rabbit that evening and roasted the animal for supper. He picketed Bonita in the brush. Then, taking his blanket, he scaled the ascent again and rolled up for the night under a bush near the dead oak. He didn't want a chance missing the expected visitor, but he slept until sunup without alarm. That day was a repetition of the preceding one. He fired another 100 rounds at innocent trees and rocks, proving to his own satisfaction that his hand was still swift and his eye keen. For 3 days he camped there, practicing each day with the pistol. Then, just as dawn was breaking, on the 4th morning, he awakened suddenly. For a space he lay there without breathing, alert and listening. He could hear nothing, and dropped his head back on the rolled poncho that served as a pillow. Again came the sound that had awakened him. Conveyed to his ear by the earth came the faint thud of a loping horse. Someone was riding nearby. Bobby rolled out, buckling on his gun belt and tying the wing leather with sure hands. He crouched there in the brush, waiting soon. He could hear the horse. Daylight was rolling across the prairie in full flood now, and Bobby retreated over the brink of the arroyo, peering cautiously through the clump of sage that camouflaged him. In a moment the horseman appeared from the direction of town. He had evidently followed the rim of the arroyo. "Blink, Jeffers," Bobby breathed as he identified the lean shoulders and hawk-like head of the rider. Jeffers' close-set eyes were darting continually around as he rode up. He seemed nervous and uneasy. His hard, leathery face was a study in massed emotion. Jeffers was under a strain. He halted his mount near the oak tree and sat there scanning the landscape on all sides. He rode to the rim so close that Bobby could have touched the horse's foot, and inspected the river bottom. Bobby lay there almost within sight, but Jeffers was not looking for anything so close at hand, and rode back to the tree and dismounted. He crawled into the tree and then emerged, with the 2 bags of gold in his hands. Bobby stepped silently into view. He was not more than 50 feet away, but Jeffers had not seen him, for the gunman was staring at the bullet holes in the bags. From the bags, Jeffers' puzzled glance traveled to the oak tree. There, for the first time, he saw the marks of Bobby's target practice. Jeffers had a keen mind. Something told him that he had walked into a trap. Dropping the money, he whirled, his hand speeding to his hip. He stared for 1 split second into Bobby's eyes, and even in that brief space, Bobby saw a malicious triumph leap into the older man's eyes as he recognized his youthful opponent. Jeffers believed that he had an easy kill. Jeffers' gun leaped into his hand and it boomed forth a belch of pink fire, but it was a second too late, for Bobby had drawn and fired with effortless ease an instant sooner. Jeffers' bullet went into the ground, and the gunman stood there swaying from the shock of the slug that had smashed through his vitals, trying to line up his wavering pistol on Bobby. But the power to do so was gone forever from his arm, even while his eyes rolled in their sockets. There spread over his face profound amazement. Then he pitched forward on the ground, writhing for a moment before he lay still. The novice had killed the expert, and it had been a fair duel. But Bobby's hand trembled as he thrust his weapon back into the leather. He steeled himself to walk up to Jeffers' body. The gunman, his stiffened fingers still grasping his pistol, had fallen sprawling over the 2 sacks of gold, as though even in death attempting to maintain ownership of the money. For a while, Bobby stood there thinking. Then he scrambled down to the river bottom, pushed through the thicket to his camp, hurriedly rolled his duffel, saddled Bonita, and rode back to the rim. The poncho he placed over Jeffers' body and the money, weighing down the corners with rocks. There was little chance that the dead man would be disturbed in that spot during the day. "I'll be back before sundown," Bobby said solemnly, as though the still form could hear and care. It was both a promise and a hope. Then Bobby turned and rode toward San Pablo, his gun padded against his thigh with comforting weight. His job was still unfinished. He did not hurry. He abandoned the river trail just on the edge of town and scattered through the brush until he reached a knoll from which he had a view of Main Street. Dismounting and careful to avoid exposing himself on the skyline, he surveyed the place carefully. At the rail in front of the Sunlight Bar were a dozen or more horses, an unusual number for the hour was hardly noon. Bobby surmised that these were the mounts of the men, probably Sheriff Barrow's own posse, back from the manhunt. He verified this by identifying the big white gelding among the mounts that Brick always rode. Bobby studied the other ponies. He was looking for a brown mare wearing 2 white socks on her forefeet. That was Lou Rawson's mount. But the distance was too great, so he mounted Bonita and rode boldly into town. He had progressed halfway up Main Street before he met anyone. The puncher strode out of a store, stared in amazement at Bobby, who was calmly riding by, then reached for his gun. But he did not complete the movement, for Bobby had him covered. "Not so fast, Two-Spot," warned Bobby, grinning. "I am on my way up to the Sunlight for a little chat with a feller, and I don't want to be delayed. Just amble back into the store." Two-Spot, his jaw hanging, complied, and Bobby proceeded without further interruption to the familiar stopping point in front of the saloon. He dismounted and noted a score of heads jutting from doors and windows down the street. His arrival and encounter with Two-Spot had not gone unnoticed. But the occupants of the Sunlight Bar were still unaware of his presence in town. Bobby looked at the horses again, and his eyes lit when he saw the animal he was hunting for. It was Lou Rawson's mount, and like most of the other animals, it was dust-covered and tired. He mounted the wooden steps, pushed through the swinging doors, and stepped inside. A dozen weary men were there, the majority slumped down in chairs at the tables, 2 leaning against the bar with glasses in front of them. For perhaps 10 seconds, Bobby stood there before he was recognized. Brick Barrow saw him first. "Bobby!" exclaimed Brick. With a stir, every man in the room turned and froze with surprise. There was their quarry, smiling coolly at them. "Shoot the skunk," roared a voice, and Bobby saw Lou Rawson pushing through the men who had risen to their feet. Bobby held up a commanding hand, and Brick, with a fierce frown, silenced Rawson. "I didn't come in to give myself up," Bobby said. "I know who did the killing. He's right here now." His eyes swept the group fiercely, and then settled on Lou Rawson. Instinctively, the men around Rawson shrank away from the burly gunman. There was no mistaking the deadly atmosphere. "Rawson," continued Bobby, "I caught your pal, Jeffers, red-handed with the gold. He was trying to double-cross you and skip with the money. You were in on the deal, both of you. Shot the old man in the back." Rawson, his face livid, went for his gun. Once more, Bobby's hand swept down and his weapon boomed twice. Both bullets struck Rawson before he could fire and hurled him back onto a card table which collapsed under him. He fell to the floor. Brick knelt at his side. He had only a minute to live, it was evident. "Is it true, Lou?" asked Brick. "Yeah," breathed Rawson with an effort. "We did it. That snake of a Jeffers sneaked away this morning. I might have known I couldn't trust him. We killed the old man, and Jeffers planted the gold coins on Kendall here in the saloon. We figured we'd be able to get away with the money easier if we turned suspicion on somebody else. I didn't know Kendall could use a gun." And Rawson was dead. Bobby sheathed the Colt, unbuckled the belt, and offered it to Big Jim Saunders. "Keep it," said Big Jim hoarsely. "You earned your 6-gun rights. Keep it and wear it." And Bobby again swung the pistol from his hip. Thank you so much for hanging out today. My name is Saul, and this is the Pulp Archive. Now, if you had fun, I'd appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, comment, and share. That stuff really helps. And like most stories we cover here, today's was recommended by you. So if there's a story you'd like to see, send us an email at pulparchivelibrary@gmail.com. We'd love to cover it. If you'd like to support the podcast and keep us going, consider becoming a member on Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/pulparchive. For a few bucks a month, you'll get access to all our podcasts, narration of complete issues, and private explicit episodes that wouldn't be allowed publicly. We feature almost every genre of pulp fiction, horror, detective, western, and even sports. Special thanks to our patrons who make the podcast possible and make every episode of the Pulp Archive happen. Every episode is dedicated to our Patreon members. I truly could not do this without you.